Shalom, I'm here today with Jonathan Neumann to talk about his book, To Heal the World, How the Jewish Left Corrupts Judaism and Endangers Israel. Thanks for joining me today, Jonathan.
Pleasure, Tuly. Lovely to be with you.
So, I heard about your book because I was browsing a bookstore in Jerusalem and I ran into a hero of mine, and I was so excited to meet Jonathan Pollard. And Jonathan Pollard, who was this legend in Israel, I introduced myself to him and I thanked him for all he's done for the Jewish people. And I gave him a copy of my book, or the Israel Bible. And he said, well, I don't have a book, but I want to recommend a book. And you said, you've got to read this book, To Heal the World. And he said it was one of the last books that his wife Esther read. And she was so caught up with it. And so he gave you the highest recommendation, him and his wife, Esther. So I immediately read it, and I started, underlining and flagging different sections. So thank you for your great contribution.
No, pleasure. Thank you. And also thank you to Jonathan. He's a very good friend of mine and has really done sort of yeoman's work in promoting the book, and it's which is wonderful. And Esther, Alea Shalom, was sort of a big fan of it, and he's a very good friend, and that's really wonderful. Thank you.
So in the section here in the beginning, it actually says that it's described, your book is described as a lively theological polemic. A lively theological polemic. Can you explain what is the argument that how the Jewish left is corrupting Judaism and endangering Israel based on this notion of tikkun olam?
Sure. I'll try to do it. I'll try to do it quickly. I guess I'll make kind of 5 points. The first is, I think, obvious to anyone who is an observer of American Judaism, the American Jewish scene, and this is really a particularly American Jewish phenomenon. The tikkun olam is what I'd call hegemonic in the American Jewish community. It's absolutely everywhere. It is kind of ubiquitous. You look at polls, you look at the major denominations. This is the thing that animates Jewish life. It's something that's recognized everywhere. Presidents talk about it. It's recognized outside of the Jewish community even. So it is the key kind of facet of American Jewish life. That's the first point, and of course is what in theory makes the book and the topic interesting.
Wait, let's just back up and just explain to our viewers.
Sure,
so
yeah.
You're talking about social justice, right? Just to be clear here, we're talking about.
Correct. So that's actually, so the second point is then what is tikkun olam, right? So we've got this concept that's kind of everywhere. So what is it? And it is social justice, and that's not in dispute. Even the advocates of tikkun olam say that. So the next question, the third thing is, well, what is social justice, right? We talk about it a lot. Everyone talks about it, and it sounds very nice. What is it? In essence, at the end of the day, social justice is left-wing politics. It's liberal politics in a nutshell. What it isn't, and this is very important, possibly the most important thing, is that it's not charity, right? A lot of the time people subsume charity, volunteering, tzedakah, what people sometimes call direct service, or even social action. Sometimes they'll subsume that under the rubric of social justice, but social justice is a political phenomenon. I want to give you a kind of a mashal, a kind of parable that I actually got from Sharon Brous, who I was debating with in Los Angeles on this a few years ago. She's a progressive rabbi, very big, did an inaugural prayer at one of the Democratic Party conventions, very big kind of figure in this area. And she came up with a parable for this, which I completely agree with. It's interesting. It's, both sides, we see this the same way. Basically said, imagine that you are walking on a path next to a river, and you see a baby drowning in the river, and you say, oh my goodness, there's a baby drowning in the river. You jump in the river and you save the baby, and then you kind of think, okay, that was strange, but you carry on your way. You see another baby and you do the same thing, another baby and another baby. Every time that you jump in the river, you are doing this kind of grassroots, tzedakah, charity, whatever it is. You're dealing with a problem right there. You see a need and you are helping someone on an individual level. But she says that then you carry on walking, you carry on doing this, and eventually you come to a point and you start to think, well, why are all these babies in the river? right? Why are all these people in the soup kitchen? While these people are homeless and so on. Where is this problem coming from? And you look up on your left side, and you see there's a cliff, and you see the babies are coming off the top of the cliff, and that's how they're ending up in the river. Now you don't know how they're getting there. They're being thrown off. Are they falling off? What's happening? So you need to start making a choice. Are you going to keep attending to the babies in the river, or are you going to take the time to start climb the cliff, explore what's going on up there, and try to work out what is the environment up there that's causing this to happen? And the advocates of Tikkun Olam say that that's the more important thing. Go up the cliff, leave aside the work on the ground. It's more important to go up and work out what is the political situation up there and try to resolve that. And the thing is that when you encounter whatever the issue is up there that's causing the babies to fall down, that is a political question. There is something that's happening in the structure of the society or in the environment on the top of the cliff that's causing this to happen, and you have to attend to that. And their argument is that is what social justice is. It is not the charity part, it's the politics part. And this brings me to the fourth point, that Tikkun Olam is not just social justice, it's Jewish social justice. So what's the difference? Well, Jewish social justice is exactly the same as regular social justice, except the pretense that it is based, that the politics of social justice are rooted in Jewish sources. So that when you go up to the top of the cliff and you start to say, okay, well, how am I going to address this? That there are Jewish sources that tell you what to do. And not only that, but those Jewish sources, whatever they tell you, it's always going to be, invariably, without question, it is going to be a left-wing liberal political solution to whatever the problem is up there. Because all of Tikkun Olam, Jewish social justice, is all left-wing or radical politics. As we said, social justice is left-wing politics. So that just brings, I guess, to the last point of the argument and sort of the bit in the last few chapters of the book, which is, well, so what? Okay, so Tikkun Olam is hegemonic in American Judaism, it's everywhere, and Tikkun Olam is social justice, and social justice is politics, it's not charity, and the Jewish sources are claimed to say this or that or whatever. Does it really make a difference? And the answer is yes. And this is why I thought it was important to write the book. I think it's bad for three reasons, this hegemony, this idea. The first is it's bad for Judaism, because people are going around thinking that they're doing Judaism by getting involved in this political work. Again, we're not talking about charity, we're talking about political work, getting involved in protests, in political fundraising, in partisanship, and so on, thinking that they're doing Judaism, and it's not Judaism. And as someone who generally likes the idea of Jews doing proper Judaism at whatever level they're comfortable at and so on, then that's a very sad thing and a bad thing that they think what they're doing is Judaism and it isn't. And also, the Jewish community, particularly in the United States, are custodians of the Hebrew Bible and its meaning and so on to non-Jews, right? The Christian community in the US and elsewhere will look to the Jews to say, well, they understand what the Hebrew Bible is about, and we need to learn from them. And if they see that this is how Jews think, that this is what they think the Hebrew Bible means, and that's a problem, because it's not only bad for you, it's then also other people are getting the wrong impression. So it's bad for Judaism. It's bad for the Jewish people and Jewish peoplehood, because Tikkun Olam is a theological justification for assimilation. There is no place in the Tikkun Olam equation for the Jews and the Jewish people. And then finally, and we can obviously go into any of these, and of course the book does in a lot of detail, is that there's no need for a Jewish state in the Tikkun Olam equation. Tikkun Olam is about universalism, is about a diasporism. There's this sort of diasporist theology growing around it. It has no place for a Jewish state, for Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. There's no need for the Jews to live in the land of Israel. So it provides a theological justification for the hostility that we see towards Israel in these pockets. So that in a nutshell is the argument of the book.
Okay, so you said a lot, and I just want to maybe even take a step backwards. So the idea of social justice seems like a very beautiful idea, whether it's charity or it's politics. When you see a baby in the river, you want to stop and help the baby. And many Jews, I think, are known for that, for being very compassionate and for looking out for the other. So what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that?
So excellent. That's a great question, because it speaks exactly to this essence and this important point to emphasize, which is that Judaism absolutely is all in favor of, as much as it is anything else, is in favor of tzedakah and compassion towards others. And that doesn't just go for Jews. It's also, as I always emphasize, the Gentile homeless need to be sheltered, the Gentile hungry need to be fed, the Gentile naked need to be clothed. We absolutely have obligations on that level to others. The question is when you get to the politics, and one of the great things that the kind of the political left more broadly have done, and where sort of the political right has failed, is in making the moral argument for the policies that they pursue. And what that means is that people now essentially associate, a kind of compassionate politics with left-wing politics, whereas actually, people on the right are just as motivated by these issues as anyone else is. But the right has done a spectacularly poor job of defining their policies and framing them in those terms. They usually talk about things like utility. This is a bad way of achieving something, rather than in moral terms. So we all are conditioned to think that to be left-wing means to be compassionate. To be compassionate means to be left-wing. And how can it be that Judaism, which, as you rightly say, is about compassion and so on, how could it be that it's anything other than left-wing politics? And by the way, to be clear, I don't advocate in the book that Judaism is synonymous with right-wing politics. I just argue that it's not synonymous with left-wing politics and with the liberal left platform of the 21st century Democratic Party. I mean, it's absurd. Like, there's like a thousands of year old religion, and the idea that it coincides wondrously with the particular political whatever a certain party has to say on any issue at any given time is obviously totally ludicrous. So you're absolutely right to raise that, and it's very important that people understand that this is not what the argument is.
Yeah. So many, I work with Christians, and many of our viewers are Christian. And one of the main questions that I always get is, why are so many Jews liberal? Can you answer that from maybe just give a little bit of context or historical background?
Sure. I mean, look, there was a time where it was very, very obvious that the liberal side of the political equation was better for the Jews. And particularly when you're looking at the old country, as it were, you're looking back in Europe, where you had the church and very reactionary and conservative forces on the one side, and you had emancipationists and liberals and so on, classical liberals on the other side. It was very obvious where the interests of the Jews lay. But obviously that became more complicated in the 21st century. The things weren't always as they seemed, but certainly there was that element to it. In the States, that was also bolstered by FDR and the Holocaust and so on. But in terms of kind of today, when people ask why are Jews liberal, it's funny, because actually, to me, the answer, particularly when you look at America, to me the answer is totally obvious, which is that they're not that Jewish. And what I mean by that is they're not that Jewish in a religious sense. You look at American Jewish demographics. American Jews are predominantly urban, secular, and they spend a lot of time in education and higher education. You look at all of those things, you basically say, okay, well, those are the ingredients for liberalism in contemporary America. I mean, those are the liberal demographics. You could even add that they're an ethnic minority, which is another thing that you would expect would lead you to a more liberal disposition. So in that respect, it makes complete sense that the Jews are liberal in the States. The Jews who are not liberal will tend to be, again, there are obviously exceptions here and there and so on, but for the most part, the biggest constituency are religious Jews, and particularly kind of the more religious you get, and that's because they don't fit that those ingredients that I mentioned. And even if they weren't Jewish, but they were still kind of religious, they'd spent less time in sort of formal secular education, universities and so on. The less time they spent there, all of those ingredients again are ingredients you would expect on the sort of more conservative side of the ledger. So that in a nutshell is the answer of why I think that American Jews are liberal, because they're not, in a religious sense, they're not that Jewish.
not that Jewish. So how would you articulate a moral vision for religious Jews or more conservative Jews, Jews who take their religion very seriously and are looking for a moral argument that would align itself more on the conservative side? Is there a similar concept like, Tikkun Olam is great because, it's sort of like it came out, and the way you describe it in the book, it's like it came out of like a PR agency, sort of was the one who branded secular Judaism with Tikkun Olam is very authentic. Not that it doesn't even come from the Bible, but it does come from, Jewish tradition. What would be the branding that you would articulate, that you would recommend for a more conservative or religious Jewish population?
So I think there's sort of two sides to that answer. One is a kind of replication of what, as it were, the other side have done, and you see that kind of growing in the last few years. Organizations like the Coalition for Jewish Values, who will promote what they consider to be more sort of traditionally Jewish positions on policy questions in the USA, on education, on abortion, and so on, to be a kind of counterweight. And they sort of look at the other side and say, okay, so you've got your hundreds of rabbis and cantors and so on that you get to sign all your letters. So actually, why don't we just do the same thing? We'll bring together our rabbis and cantors, and we'll just do the same, and we'll sign it on the other side. And there's definitely space for that in the debate, and I think it's also a sign of a more kind of muscular and vocal Orthodox community in particular in the States. I think both because the numbers are now growing. I mean, they're still relatively small compared to the rest of American Jewry, but they are definitely growing. And I think you've also seen in the in the kind of in the Trump years, we've seen what Orthodox Jews can do when they reach positions of influence. I mean, there've obviously been Orthodox Jews in other administrations as well. Here you have people like David Friedman and Jason Greenblatt and Jared Kushner and so on, and obviously in alliance with evangelicals like Mike Pence and Mike Pompeo, and you've seen the kind of policy results that can come out of that. So I think there's a certain kind of zeitgeist there. That's in terms of the kind of specifically kind of conservative stuff. What I would say and I've said in the book, as I said earlier, I don't really sort of see necessarily that Judaism is synonymous with whatever the Republican Party happens to say at any given time either, even though different generations things incline one way or the other. But I think there are sort of two solutions, or two options rather, for American Jews who want their Judaism to sort of inform how they make political decisions at the ballot box and so on. One is essentially to ensure the political survival of the Jews. This is what we see in, Yirmiyahu, seek the peace of the city and so on. So essentially, so that you will have peace and eventually you'll be able to return to the land of Israel, essentially survive physically, allow your communities to thrive as much as possible. So, issues like Israel and other foreign policy issues, countering anti-Semitism, the high price of education, religious freedom. These are the sorts of things that then you might say, okay, well, clearly, my Jewish community or my Judaism, will inform how I want to vote and be active and campaign on those sorts of issues. And on other issues, maybe Judaism doesn't have a view, when it comes to the diaspora view. In Israel, it can be a different question, but in terms of, in the United States, as I sort of say in the book, that for some reason it's become, controversial to posit that maybe the God of Israel doesn't really much care for, the marginal tax rate in the contemporary United States. Maybe, whether it's 1% here or 1% there is not actually the be all and end all from a theological point of view. Maybe you're just free as an individual to just decide, what you want to, how you want to vote on that. So that's one way, that you just focus on those specific Jewish issues. And then there's another side, which is the kind of the Noahide side, which is to look at the Noahide laws and the Noahide code and say, actually, I think there is a kind of moral standard by which ordinary non-Jewish people should live, and I'm going to advocate for that. For that kind of moral standard in the way that I engage politically. So that's also an option. I think the Noahide stuff is quite complicated just from a rabbinical point of view. I think there's a lot less consensus about where and how it applies and when and so on. But that is also kind of I think an option available for people if that's what they seek.
So in my final question, I wanted to ask, the book is very, very nuanced and very important for Jews to really understand, and how the Jew, like you said, how the Jewish left corrupts Judaism and endangers Israel. But what is the main takeaway you would want non-Jewish readers to get from your book?
Oh, that's a great question. I suppose, I guess, speaking to what I said earlier, that don't judge Judaism by the Jews. I suppose look more closely. Just because a lot of Jews happen to be active in a particular political setting and claim that that's what that's what the Bible says, that's what the creation story teaches us, or the story of Yosef, or the Nevi'im, or the prophets, or the Exodus, or our prayers, that this is actually what they tell us. Don't necessarily don't take it as that's necessarily what it really means. That actually there is an enormous misunderstanding in American Judaism, in American Jewish community, about Tikkun Olam, what it actually means, and its actual relevance and centrality in the political activism, and crucially, I guess, that the support from Christian communities and other communities for the Jewish community and for Israel and for the fight against anti-Semitism and so on is enormously appreciated, and they'll get a lot of criticism from kind of Tikkun Olam Jews for their views and their practices and their contribution to the public debate in the US, but that's not the totality of Jewish opinion. There's a lot of Jews who value and welcome the contributions that Christians make to the public square, and as I said, their support for Israel, there's also and it's something I again mentioned in the book as well. There's an enormous amount of hypocrisy, because you take the Christian right, for example. They put their cards on the table and they say, this is what we believe, this is why we believe it, and this is how we think the country should run as a result. What the kind of Tikkun Olam lot do is, on the one hand, to say that this is what we believe and this is why we believe it, pointing to Jewish texts and religious sources, but on the other side, sort of on the other half of their mouth, say in the same breath that we believe in the strict separation of church and state, and we shouldn't bring religion into the public square, and so on. So what they're doing is exactly the same, but the Christian right, to their credit, are completely straight about it, and open and transparent, and the Tikkun Olam sort of Jewish left try to have their cake and eat it, and criticize the Christian right while doing exactly the same thing from the other side. So so at least the other side is honest about what they're doing, and you can respect that a great deal. So they should know that they're appreciated, and there's more under the surface, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that there's so much that religious Jews and religious Christians have in common, and helping to dispel this idea that Judaism equals democratic values, or the democratic platform, and that Judaism is social justice, is something that really needs to be explained the way that you did, and that we have so much in common with Americans who are focused on building family values and building individuals who get their inspiration from the Bible and from their faith. That there's a lot in the Jewish community that speaks to that. There's a lot of Jews who believe in that. So thank you for being one of them, and thank you for writing your book. Where can they get it from? Is there a website, or just from Amazon?
Best thing is Amazon. It's the easiest, or any other major American bookseller. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tuly. Thank you.